So the deadline for this is the 28th of January. So you've got the best part of 2 months, which might seem like a long time, but as you've probably noticed, that time goes very quickly. And like I've already said, the whole point of this assignment is that you will prepare, plan, and document a project of some kind. I recommend that you use an actual project. If there's something going on in your workplace, then that you can use as a project, as an example of a project, then that might be better. You might have to augment it. You might have to fabricate some of the evidence, but nevertheless, if you can actually apply it to a real-world situation, it might help a great deal. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, the first question is, does it have to be a real project? Do I have to have an actual project? It doesn't have to be a real project. I recommend that it is, and if you've got one, then use that. But if you don't, then it's not the end of the world. Make something up, and we'll talk more about that later on. So, when you're coming up with a project, when you're thinking about, you've got an idea for a project, first thing you do is a project brief. Remember what a project brief is? What's a project brief? Yeah, a brief description of a project. What kind of things would your brief description of your project include? What you're going to do, why you're doing it, when you're doing it, yeah, and how long it's going to take, the idea of time frame. Who's doing it, yeah? Yeah, no, that's good. And some idea of cost and a few other bits, maybe some of the key features. But yeah, what are you going to do? Who's it for? What is it going to do? So some list of features or buttons or options. Possibly even a screenshot or two. I mean, wouldn't necessarily be on the first page, but just some brief mock-up that will help explain what the project is about. Or if you're building an app, then maybe a screenshot will help you. If you can sum it up in a simple screen with some buttons on it, then yeah, that might help get you started thinking about the rest of the project. Yeah. So once you've done your brief, I mean, this is going to be on Moodle, so if you're trying to get it down, then don't worry too much. But yeah, so once you've got your brief, once you've got an idea for your project, and you've sort of fleshed it out a little bit, and you've discussed it with maybe a few other people, and you've all agreed that it's a good idea, you might have to get approval from your project board. You basically have to explain it to other people, and once you've explained it to other people and they think it's a good idea, you might get the opportunity to do some investigation, which will then, yeah, so you'll do some investigation, which will possibly include, break it down to a feasibility study and various other bits. So what kind of things could you include in an investigation? How would you go about doing an investigation? Yeah, research. So how would you do research? Yeah, talking to people, interviews, absolutely right. Yeah, interviews, questionnaires. Surveys, yeah. Not just that, I mean, if it's something that you haven't done before, maybe if it's about a system that you haven't come across before, you might need to do some research, you might need to have a look on the internet, or come up with some documentary evidence. You might have to look at sort of budget, see if you can actually afford it. How much money do you actually have, or how much money is it likely to take? How much money is it likely to cost? So you might have to get some quotes to find out if you can actually afford some of the components you need. So interviews, observations, so documentation, articles, reports, websites. I mean, quotes would probably be in there as well. Questionnaires. Elance.com is, if you're struggling for ideas, is a really good place to have a look, because these are project ideas. These are people who want people to carry out these software projects for them. And you'll find an awful lot of information there, obviously, about a particular project. And feedback on your brief. You could also include that. That would also be definitely worth including in your investigation. I mean, this is just, we talked about investigation a lot. We talked about the brief a lot. So this is just to sort of augment your notes. Everything you've already got down is obviously fine and correct. So these are other things that, I don't know, just sort of augment what you've already got. Yeah, and keep the evidence. So if you get some feedback, if you already have an idea, if you're already maybe midway through a project, it might be good to keep some of the evidence of it, so you sort of go back. Analyze. So after you've done your investigation and you've got like all this information, you've got all this detail about the system that you might want to build, you then have to analyze this information. So when you go about designing a system, I mean, we're kind of getting to the nitty-gritty of system design, and we will continue this in a moment. So any system can be broken down into its input, output, process, and storage needs. So if you think about any program that you use, you'll be needing to tell it things. You need to put information into the system, and you'll also need to get information out of the system. And often these two things are really good at guiding your development, design of the system. What information are you expecting to be able to put into the system? What information are you expecting to be able to get out of the system? Often a good place to start when you actually, before you sort of get designing your system, is just list all the stuff that you want it to do. And then the storage needs and processes sort of come after. I mean, the process is basically what happens between the input and the output. And the storage is obviously storing the inputs and the outputs. So arguably the process and storage are less important. It's the input and the output which is the important thing. So having done your investigation, having spoken to all these different people, you've got a pretty good idea of what people are expecting. What do they want to be able to put into the system? What do they want to be able to get out of the system? And then the process and storage just sort of links the two. Are there alternative solutions? The big project at the moment is upgrading our Moodle offering, our CC Online, our entire virtual learning environment. And the simple thing would just be to move to Moodle 2. But then there are other systems available. There are other online learning systems, and it's worth considering those as well. Sometimes maybe just doing a straight upgrade is not necessarily the best thing to do. Maybe just sort of try something entirely different, and it might be better. And scope, as we've already discussed, organizational policies and compatibility. There might be certain things tying you to existing systems. You might need to find that out. For example, if all your computers are running Windows, then it makes sense to, well, just sort of stick with Windows-based software. If your servers are all running Windows, then that might limit what you can use. I don't know. There might be things stopping you from sort of having a completely clean slate. And feasibility, obviously, technical feasibility, ethical feasibility, legal and social. And during this time, you'll probably also come across some costs. You'll have some ideas for some key performance indicators and critical success factors and who's doing what and when and how. So during the analysis, some of this, well, as you're analyzing your information, some of this will be coming to light. Some of the critical parts will be coming to the surface. Some of the critical information that you need. And that's when you build your requirements spec. That's what your requirement specification is. When we were focusing on the project management side of things, we didn't really focus too much on the requirements. It was just sort of there. We were focusing more on the process of going from analysis, design, building, and stuff. The requirement spec links your analysis and your design. The requirement spec is basically a list of what you need your system to do. The next slide will go into more detail about that. But again, like as I was saying with project management, with the different tools that are available, it's so big and there are so many different ways of doing it. Just pick one and stick with it. It doesn't really matter how you do it. How you capture the information is not as important as just making sure that you have captured the information. Spend less time worrying about the framework and more time worrying about the contents. Yeah. So requirement specifications, if you Google requirement spec, you'll find masses of information about different headings and different ways of doing it. The important thing is that all the information that you've got so far is captured. And these are the different ways of storing it, of displaying it, of different categories. Different maybe ideas to sort of guide what it is you're looking for. When you do your investigation and your analysis, it's always a good idea to know what you're aiming for. Why are you doing your investigation and your analysis? And maybe these are the bits of information that you're hoping to get out of it. Does that make sense? Investigation, analysis, and the requirement spec are all kind of the same thing, just at different stages. The investigation is sort of the legwork, the grunt work, the actual going to different websites and going and sitting in front of people. The analysis is taking a step back and looking at all the information that you've discovered and trying to pick out the important facts. And the requirement spec is then the important facts displayed in an easily digestible form. So it will have the purpose, the functions, a sort of overview of the whole system, It's a good idea to list your inputs and outputs so that they're actually captured. So when you actually deliver the system, people don't say you forgot the log out button or something. If you've done it properly, then you remembered that you needed to include that. The look and the feel. I mean, I suppose an advantage of using an iterative project management cycle is that you can go through this twice. So you do your investigation and analysis, and then you draw up some wireframes. You draw up some sketches of what your program is going to look like, or what your system is going to look like. You can then take it back to your customer and say, "What do you think? There are these 3 different options. What do you think?" And that's something we're going through at the moment. Some of my AS students and a couple of the second year HND students are building an app for the college to integrate and plug into our new Moodle system. And and they've got some designs, some screenshots, some JPEGs basically at the moment. So they don't do much, but it's an idea of how the system will look, how the system will feel, which is important. I mean, if it's unattractive to use, people won't use it. Macs are extremely popular these days because it just looks and feels a lot better to use, in my personal opinion. But similarly with the iPhone versus other systems, if it's attractive to use, people will prefer it. So getting the look and feel right is almost as important as getting your inputs and outputs right. The platform it's going to be running on, as we've already talked about, how it's going to be supported. Who's going to be supporting it? Make sure they're actually trained. Make sure that people who are going to be supporting your system actually know how it works and are able to support it. So these can be sort of dealt with in lists to a certain extent and bullet points. There are lots and lots of different diagrams that you can talk about and that you can come up with. I'm going to explain a couple of them, but if you want to go for sort of extra credit, or if you want to do some extra research, or just data flow diagrams and entity relationship diagrams are also worth looking at. I'm going to explain process flow diagrams and use case diagrams in a minute because I think they are the most useful. But depending on the system you're building, data flow and entity relationship diagrams might also be useful. Time and cost, obviously, though it's amazing how often that gets forgotten and you get sort of midway through the year and you run out of money. Key performance indicators, critical success factors, we've already said. Any possible future upgrades? So maybe as you're coming up with your list of essential features, maybe also have some ideas for less essential features, but things that might be useful in the future. And again, training and maintenance having a system, it might be the most amazing system in the world. If it doesn't work, and no one knows how it works, and no one knows how to support it, then it's no good. So, any questions on the requirements side? We haven't gone into much detail about this before, mainly because it wasn't really necessary from like a complete project management lifecycle point of view. But from the point of view of actually delivering a useful system, it's an extremely useful document. If this is and this will be part of your project proposal, and therefore this will be part of the thing that your customer has agreed to. And when you get to the end of the project, and you deliver your brand new system, and the customer says, "I'm not going to pay you because I don't like it, or it doesn't do what I thought it would," you can say, "Well, this is what you told us you wanted to do, and this is what it actually does." You can compare your original requirements back to your customer's agreed to with what your system actually does. And if they've agreed to it, then you can take them to court and they will have to pay you. Similarly, if you got your requirements back and you ignored it and you just sort of built something, you can compare the final system with your requirements back. And if it's the same, then you succeeded. If it's not the same, then you failed. So getting this document right is very important. It should then guide your design. So when you go to designing and then finally building your system, which is, well, get as far as the design, the process flow diagrams and the use case diagrams are, in my opinion, perhaps the most useful ways of explaining what your system is about. So if you've not come across process flow diagrams before, the main symbols that you're interested in are your start and end symbols. Generally, most people would agree that they're basically squares but with rounded edges. Decisions in your system are diamonds. So at every diamond, you should have at least 2 forks. So find a menu item or button which looks related to what you want to do. I can't find one goes this way, or OK goes down this way. Did it work? Yes, no. So decision boxes are diamond shaped. Process boxes are squares. And that's the basics of process flow diagram. There are many, 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 many more symbols. There are symbols to represent databases. There are symbols to represent the database symbol is, and if you have some at some point, if you want to store, I don't know, the word that you Google, you could have a fork coming up here, which would then go into a cylinder shape, and that's the symbol for a database. If you then wanted to print something out, then a printed document is a sort of wavy line. So there are lots and lots of different shapes of symbols, but the main ones are the diamond-shaped boxes and the square boxes. And the start and the end stages are basically squares but with rounded edges. And it describes the process. It describes, basically, if someone's starting your program for the first time, then this is where they would start. And then maybe sort of display something on screen, and then maybe if there's a number of options, like which option have they chosen? So that would be a diamond box. And then either they chose this option, in which case you go off and do some other thing, or they chose this option, in which case you go off and do some other thing. Or they clicked exit, and then maybe the program would exit. Does that make sense? Some of you will, I imagine most of you have probably seen something very similar to this before. But if you could do a process flow diagram in your submission, then that would be very good. The other type of diagram, which I use a lot and I think are underrated, is what's called a use case diagram. And initially it looks a bit confusing and complicated, but actually it's phenomenally simple, which I think is part of the reason why it's so powerful. Basically, you start out by picking your user groups. So in the case of a college, then you would have a student is definitely one user group, one type of user. And then you have instructors or lecturer, which would be a different type of user. And then you might have course registrars, and you might have other administrators. And what you do is for each, first thing you do is identify all your user groups. So there's also, I don't know, post office or reprographics, and then you've got maybe researchers. So so you first figure out who your users are. Once you've figured out who your users are, you then figure out what each user can do. Because different people will be able to do different things within the same system. It might just say, okay, so two different examples would be maybe, I don't know, a game, in a normal game, most people can just do the same thing. There's no different users. There's one type of user, which is the player. And then the player logs in, and then all players can do all the same things. But then, something like Moodle, for example, the way I see Moodle is very different to the way you see Moodle, which is very different to the way that the support guys see Moodle, which is very different to the way that the Moodle developer sees Moodle. So different people can do different things with the same system. Does that make sense? So the use case diagram is an excellent way of capturing that. You basically, and all these circles here is just things that people can do with that system. Yeah? Does that make sense? I love them because it's a very straightforward way of capturing all your features. Because not everyone has access to the same features. And as systems become more powerful and more complicated, and particularly if it's a database thing, then use case diagram is an excellent way of capturing this information. Don't worry too much. I'm going to put this online, and if you Google use case diagrams, you'll see plenty of examples. That's what a use case diagram is. And I mean, if you're wondering about what these lines are about here, it's just basically sort of extending or expanding on this one. So just to be information to students, well, this is then listing the different types of information. So if one of these is a bit more complicated, then you can just sort of have other bits coming out of it. Very simple, very straightforward, extremely useful. So I think that's enough of me and PowerPoint. The important thing that you have to do, if I go back to basically you have to submit the whole point of this exercise is to prepare, plan, and document a project. So if you can be a project that you've actually engaged in, either at work or in your personal time, or an idea that you've had for a while and somehow never got around to doing it, maybe you've had like this genius idea for an app or an amazing idea for a website. This would be a good time to sort of flesh it out a bit more, think about it in more detail. I have some of my own suggestions in case you can't think of anything at all. But before I pollute your thinking, maybe, I don't know, have discuss some ideas amongst yourselves. See if you can see what you can come up with. Share some ideas for projects with the person next to you, and write them down.